right. So, good evening, everybody. And unfortunately, I believe that there's a fair bit of traffic, and I don't know what all happening out there, probably due to load shedding. And as I've just said now, before we started the recording, let's just begin by saying it's 29 August 2023. Time is now 19 hours 15. So I'm starting 15 minutes late. Yet again, this seems to be a trend when it comes to Zoom meetings. And even though the group is 70 odd strong, the numbers that turn out on Zoom meetings is a little bit low, which is unfortunate, because even though everybody will be able to benefit from the video recording that is published either on the Constantia Kloof YouTube channel, or if I might decide to put it up on the Disaster Relief CERT channel, YouTube channel specifically, because this one in particular is concerning disaster relief planning, or planning for disasters within the Constantia Kloof and surrounding areas. So that being said, many people will actually sit back and say I'm shouting at them. This seems to be a common trend that comes out, and I think it is mainly because of the fact that, somebody pointed out to me today that, Chad, you in actual fact don't work on a cell phone. People are used to voice notes and that via the cell phone, whereas you've got a full-blown audio-visual sound mixing desk that you operate from. So the quality of sound is a lot higher, and it does tend to be reasonably loud. So on that basis, if you think I'm shouting, please turn your volume down. I'm not going to apologize. If I do start shouting, believe you me, the next door neighbors will know about it as well. That being said, let's jump straight in. Initially, I will edit this part of the video out. I want to put it as a little bit of a separate with a new introduction. All right. So, Aslam, I'm glad I've got one person. It just does make it a little bit more personal. And as I'm talking to you at the moment, please understand I'm really not squint. I'm not like Jeff Derm's hand puppet. But my teleprompter is actually between the two screens. So I've got you up on the left-hand screen. So if your video is on and I look at you there, I'm not being squint. Now, basically, I don't think that you will have received, because I see you weren't on the groups, you might not have received the preliminary assessment that I did for the Constantia Kloof area. And I'm not going to introduce myself, even for the purposes of this particular session. There are other videos that there's more than enough introduction into disaster relief CERT, its purposes, our plans, our way forward, our expectations, and of course, my background in particular. And it is on that basis that I do get a little bit annoyed when I get challenged, because at the end of the day, I do actually have some experience with regards to what we are about to discuss. Now, as I said during the previous section that's been separated, during the assessment of Constantia Kloof alone, the 2011 census put the demographics for Constantia Kloof at 1,650 odd residential properties, with a population of approximately 4,500 people. And of course, Constantia Kloof, for those of you that don't actually know it, because I can guarantee you, 99.9% of the residents of this community actually think that Constantia Kloof begins somewhere just on the eastern side of Golf Club Terrace, going down towards Flora Cliff, and moves across down to Constantia Drive at the bottom of the ridge, and then up towards Jim Fisher, up Christian de Wet, up to Ondekkers Road, and back down to more or less the Golf Club Terrace aspect. That's not actually true and correct, because on the west side, or the western side of Christian de Wet, there are a number of houses there that fall within the Constantia Kloof area or suburb itself. And of course, Constantia Kloof forms part of Ward 89. And ultimately, Ward 89 is just one of the wards within a Region C, or the city of Johannesburg's Region C. So as you can see, we got multiple levels, we got multiple layers that need to be contended with. And from a disaster relief CERT perspective, because we are a national non-government organization, where our principal and sole object is to prepare volunteers to be able to assist communities in times of disaster. Our auxiliary objectives ultimately are, one, to create awareness amongst the community, two, to in actual fact train the community, and three, to recruit volunteers as a whole. There are two others as well, and I see that this meeting will end in about 10 minutes. So Aslam, if it does end, I'll just reopen Zoom. I did in actual fact not renew the unlimited minutes on it. I didn't find it very beneficial. And also, you know, on a 40-minute recording, it allows everybody to quickly go and get a cup of coffee or take a walk down the passage. And I found a lot of people at around about 40 minutes bailed out in any event and then didn't return. So being a national non-government organization, of course, you know, now I've got to deal with things on multiple levels, multiple suburbs, multiple municipalities, multiple provinces, and then, of course, on the national level as well. So this does create a fair bit of a problem moving forward. I recently, about a month ago, funny enough, I think it was, I had a meeting with several of the residents associations, residents forums. There were a couple of neighborhood watchers and block watchers that came up as well. And during that meeting, I asked them to go back to their various committees and members and to, in actual fact, start discussing how they, in actual fact, would fit in terms of disaster risk reduction and disaster relief and assistance. And therefore, if that concept can be understood within the organizations that are operating throughout the area, and of the 20-odd organizations, I'm talking about RAs, RFs, neighborhood watchers, block watchers from Witpoortjie all the way through down to Qualarina, FNQB, Bergbron, and all the way up this side, including Honeydew and Constantia Kloof North. Residents Against Crime, that's their correct name. So there's a fair bit of activity that has taken place, and discussion, not just activity, but further discussion that has taken place leading up to this point. And this is now the point where I need to reach out to the community and the residents of, in particular, Constantia Kloof. I'm going to say and surrounds, but each suburb needs to be dealt with in its own particular level. The reason for this is quite simply, our risks of Constantia Kloof is very different to Florida. Florida, the risks associated and that exist within Florida are very different to Vleerhof. I think as quick and a simple explanation or justification for my statement is the Vleerhof, Stormel, sort of southern Roodepoort main reef side, one of the greatest risks that exist today, 29 August 2023, are the Zamas. But what are the risks associated in Constantia Kloof? What happens with the Zamas there doesn't affect us here. Yeah, but a lot of people are going to say, but that's not a disaster. Well, yet. It's not a disaster yet. You see, in 2015, when they launched the Sendai framework, the United Nations and all of the parties involved in developing the entire Sendai framework, they've now included civil unrest as a peril, which means it becomes a potential disaster, or there's a risk of it becoming a disaster. And in the case of the Zamas, well, you know, if they do blow something up underground, we could end up with massive sinkholes that 18-wheelers could in actual fact disappear into, and we could lose several lives. I mean, just imagine 10 taxis all doing, you know, the legal speed limit is 60 kilometers an hour and disappearing into that big hole. All of them with a normal legal load of occupants, all disappearing into that hole. Just ask yourself, how many people are going to lose their lives? Just let that sink in for a minute. I said at the beginning of the previous section of the video, I don't beat about the bush, I beat about the bush. And I want to say this to you, that as a resident of Constantia, Kloof, or any suburb who might be watching this video, by not doing anything, it could cost you your life or the life of your loved ones. Could be your mother, your brother, your sister, your auntie, your uncle, aunt, wife, children. Inaction and ignorance. Ignorance in particular is the number one cause of death when it comes to disaster. And for those of you that are sitting there and haven't had the opportunity to watch my other videos, just before our time out here, I want to briefly give you my background, and it's quite simple. I specialize in disaster relief and management. I received all of my training almost 30 years ago, where I was trained to deal with large-scale populations. I'm talking 60, 70, 100 million people at a time. And my training was provided by the International Committee of the Red Cross and what was then called the League of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Yes, I spent almost 20 years with the South African Red Cross Society. All right, so basically what I said is I just, in closing on the previous section, gave a little bit of my background so that those of you that had not watched any of the previous videos and didn't have any prior knowledge of who I am, this would just sort of say to you, look, guys, hang on a second. There's a reason I'm very direct, and there's a reason I say that ignorance is the number one killer, and that's exactly what happens. You see, a lot of people sit back in their communities, and first thing they think is it'll never happen. Well, the first thing they actually don't think about is what can happen, and that's where we miss the point. We don't know what can happen, and then in conversation, they'll say it will never happen to us. Or I'm not interested because it doesn't affect me. Unfortunately, that's not always the truth, because what happens on the other side of Johannesburg most definitely and most assuredly can in actual fact affect you here in Constantia, Kloof. Whether you believe it or not, it's a fact. You know, you can sit back and say, well, fire is not going to, I won't be burnt by fire, but fire will burn. That's guaranteed. Just try put your hand over a gas stove, for example, and keep it there. Don't move it. You'll soon move your hand. And that is the concept where we need to, as residents and as adults, ultimately, we should in actual fact be sitting back and saying, look, you know, we might not have had these types of storms that we've had, and we might not have the amount of earthquakes like we have at the moment that we are experiencing. And another classical example is that, well, we've never had Bree Street blow up to the point that it's blown up, where literally 5 blocks of street are no longer. And fortunately, only one person, or unfortunately, but fortunately, it was 1 and not 100 or 1,000 people that lost their lives. Even here in Constantia, Kloof, I remember during the during the 2021 floods at KwaZulu-Natal, there was an iconic photograph that was circulated by one of the chappies that did a lot of photography there. He's given us as disaster relief CERT permission to use his photographs on condition we actually credit him. But his photograph depicted a V in the mountainside where a whole section had collapsed due to the rains. And on the Constantia, Kloof and Surrounds group, I actually one evening said, you know, you guys need to realize this could be us. And several people came back to me privately and flipped me upside down, and others abused me outright in terms of what they had to say. And the one chappie in particular actually responded and said, no, there's too much rock here on the mountain. That can't happen on the ridge here by Constantia, Kloof. And my initial reaction was, are you Superman? Have you got X-ray vision? Do you know what's under our ground? For all you know, the rock is less than a meter high and everything else is water. Well, needless to say, on the 9th and the evening of the 9th of December 2022, the western side of Johannesburg, we're not the West Rand, we're the western side of Johannesburg, experienced quite an extensive rainstorm that took us virtually through until about 7 or 8 a.m. on the 9th. So it began on the 8th, 9th, it subdued a bit. But it picked up again later in the afternoon, carried on in the evening again. And by the 11th of December 2022, there's actually a complex on the ridge in Constantia Kloof where 7 units within that complex have been evacuated due to the damage suffered as a result of the mudslide. Chad, did you just choke on the word mudslide? Yeah, I did. It was an actual mudslide. Mud had poured into various units. Those walls could have collapsed and we could have lost lives. And the question that I have is, why are we not prepared for this? And I think Disaster Relief CERT, being a new organization, needs to step up to the plate. We need to become very vocal. Myself in particular, which I have now seriously begun being vocal about. And I need to encourage residents to sit back and think of the potential loss of life. My preliminary assessment, I stipulate out of 4,500 people, if we are subjected to a natural disaster, like a tornado ripping through Constantia Kloof or an earthquake, and there's very few of you that know this, but the earthquake's fault line is virtually here at the corner of Christian de Wet and on Dekkers Road, just about 100, 200 meters to the west. We can fall off the top of the mountain. Are you ready for it? Ask yourself what you're going to do with your children if that side of the ridge goes. Ask yourself, what are you going to do if suddenly at 2 o'clock in the morning you got a whistling sound and there goes your roof and you got bricks coming down on top of you and your children? That's what you got to ask yourself as a resident. What are you going to do? And I think more appropriately, what could you do? Not only for yourself, everything with disaster relief. I want to tell you, not just disaster risk reduction. There are two different things. You do things to reduce the risk of a disaster. But during times of a disaster, your relief starts at home. Your family comes first. But then what do you do after that? Especially households with teenage children. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the way that this country is going in every aspect, I appeal to you to consider becoming a registered disaster relief CERT volunteer. Come and learn, come and train, come and get educated. Ensure that you understand the risks. To give everybody an example, over the last 3.5 years, Rory Crouch actually developed and wrote the Introduction to Basic Radio Communications, which MCOM has officially published, and we only provide it in book form. That there is specifically for disaster relief CERT volunteers. But I've also got a full-blown, and I think this one's 98 page training manual on who and what disaster relief CERT is, but more importantly, how we integrate with disaster management, the Disaster Management Act, the disaster management centers, and what it is that we are supposed to be doing as volunteers for our local communities. And the training module that sets us apart is the Disaster Area Damage Assessment. This is the one that actually trains our CERT volunteers on what they should in actual fact do. One before disaster and two after disaster. So you see, not everybody needs to be a paramedic or go and do first aid or do firefighting. You can join us and do that if you want to. We'll arrange and coordinate and try and help you out. And of course, we are a public benefit organization. We are a non-profit company. We rely on donations to train our volunteers. We rely on donations to purchase manuals. At this moment in time, we are over 80 volunteers throughout the city of Joburg. And our volunteers have spent thousands of rands on equipment of their own accord from their own pocket. And it's taken them time over the years, and they've bought radios. They've undergone other training like first aid or fire. The rest of them are sitting back, waiting to see, where they can in actual fact assist, etc., etc. Now, just remember that tonight is the very first introduction to disaster planning. So why am I talking about all of this? Well, it's part of the planning phase. You see, you have to decide as an individual as to whether or not you could contribute something. And that's a question that is asked of me on a regular basis. I know somebody the other day actually sent me a message, a young lady, and she said to me, Chad, I don't know what I could do for disaster relief CERT. And I said, why not? She said, because I'm 72 years of age. What do you think I could do? And I had to have a good laugh with her. And I said to her, you know what? You're not dead. There's plenty you can do. Before, during, and after a disaster. Whether you're 16, being a legal age to get involved, or whether you are 90. If you're still breathing, you can still help, even if it means during times of any incident where there's an evacuation, for example. You could come to an evacuation shelter for 2 hours on day one and sit and write names of displaced persons in a register. Or you, depending on what we're doing, I don't like to go computers and cell phones. I want to go back to basics. I come from the civil defense days. Everything was pen and paper or pencil and paper. That's how you recorded your information. Funny enough, it's amazing to actually sit back and have a look at international humanitarian law, another subject I'm trained in particular the Geneva Conventions and the protocols. And the protocols actually, in terms of the tracing documents, are still paper-based. Hey, in the year 2023. There's method in the Red Cross's madness. You see, they are accustomed to working in third world countries. We're not far off there. But we don't have to rely on technology. If you're 72 or 92, you can sit at a desk and come and help write names. You know how important that is. I'm gonna play with your emotions. I'm gonna do this all the time. As a Red Cross instructor, as a paramedic myself, having trained people in the medical field, there is only one way to learn, and that is by feel. If you cannot feel the pulse, you'll never know the pulse. If you cannot see the blood, you will never know how to stop the blood. I'm going to say this to you. Your family is divided due to a tornado through Constantia Kloof. You might be working in Sandton or Germiston. You can't get into Constantia Kloof because Constantia Kloof is no more. Those that have been able to survive have been moved out of Constantia Kloof, maybe into Helderklein, maybe into Witpootjie. Might have moved them up somewhere to a shelter in Honeydew or Reimsig. You don't know where they are. How are you going to find them? Ask yourself that question. How are you going to find your children? I'll give you an example. We got Constantia Kloof Primary School sitting right here on our doorstep. I'm not too sure what their student count or their complement is there. But I would imagine there's about 1,500 people. Ask yourself, what are we going to do if a tornado comes through this area? And all of you guys in Constantia Kloof are in actual fact working in Germiston or outside of this area. Who's going to go and get your children for you? Or should I rather sit here and say, you know what? It's your responsibility. It's your child. You leave Germiston, you come and fetch them, and you go and take them to safety, to a place of safety. You see, that is the attitude that most people actually adopt. That's the wrong attitude. I work in Constantia Kloof. You are working in Germiston. Who's closer to your child? We need to have community members, residents that are able and capable through an early warning system of that tornado of being able to go down to that school and to go and assist in removing your children out of that school to a place of safekeeping. And then that's where the 72-year-old will kick in. Name, age, right in the hair color, school, any other distinguishing marks, whatever information is required for tracing. For tracing. Yes, and then that's the positive side. There's the negative side as well. People are going to lose their lives in times of a disaster. We need other people. You know, it's something that's always forgotten during disasters. It's a thing called a morgue or temporary mortuary. Where do you put those that have lost their lives? Especially when you can't get into or get out of an area. My CERT volunteers get annoyed with me when I tell them, listen, dude, you registered as a volunteer in Constantia Kloof. If a tornado comes through Constantia Kloof, I'm not even going to worry about you. The chances are you are dead. I need to be able to go to the guys in Florida, Discovery, Witpootjie, Helderkruin, Caronvale, across the road, Honey Hills, and say, right, now you guys are going to be deployed to get in and go and do the assessment and do the reports and show disaster management and the other emergency management services, i.e. ambulance and fire, and notify the search and rescue guys like Canine Search and Rescue, USAR, SARSA. They are now Search and Rescue ZA. They used to be Off-Road Rescue Unit. We need to be able to get them in quickly to save lives. We need volunteers to do that. That's you, not me. I'm the big mouth. I'm the trouble stirrer. My amateur radio license call sign is Zulu Sierra 6 Oscar Papa Sierra OPS. I took it specifically for the word ops, operations. That was the last position I held with the South African Red Cross Society, Southern Transvaal region. I was the operations manager. I know a lot of people actually think OPS stands for Old Pot Stirrer. But look, I wear blue. Just call me Old Papa Smith. Yeah, I can have humor. But I can also flick you upside down if you're going to play silly buggers. And I've had it. I've had people come to me and say, why must we care about the children at the school? Those are the guys I want to get up. I want to give them a clap myself. We need to create awareness amongst our communities. You, the resident watching this video, I hope you're going to walk away and say, you know what? He's a rude, arrogant, abrupt bliksem, but he's telling the truth. We cannot sit back and say, forget the kids. We cannot. You know, I know somebody is probably going to watch this video someday and they're going to have a good laugh at me again. I met with a couple here and I mentioned that during the production of the disaster area damage assessment training manual, yes, I've produced something like 1,800 training slides, 88 videos of between 10 and 15 minutes each. Okay, no problem, Aslam. Yeah, it's coming up 2 minutes. Be blessed. I'll catch you later. I'm going to finish in the next 2 minutes in any event. But anyway, I actually brought up a comment and said, you know, we've got an 82-year-old in this area. Should I, in actual fact, sit back here and say, well, we shouldn't worry about her and like just literally let her sit and rot in a chair? And the couple said, oh, it's my mother you're talking about. And I had to apologize. But you know, this young lady also didn't react in the negative. Because a little bit later on, I asked her what actually she does. And she works with patients. And my analogy wasn't wrong. And I think every community member needs to understand that at the end of the day, anything that you do, everything that you do, whatever you do, can make a difference. And it is on that basis I'd like you to walk away, having watched this video, and ask yourself, what can I do once I register as a disaster relief CERT volunteer? That's the first step. And even though I promote disaster relief CERT, being a director of the NGO, if you want to join the Red Cross, that's also fine. Or give to the givers, that's also fine. Or any other organization that is a registered NGO specifically for disaster-related activities, that's also fine, as long as you do something. There is another area where residents might find that they are in a position to assist better than, you know, volunteering their time. And I must, just before I can go on with that, I would like to say that from a disaster relief CERT perspective, we are not a first responder organization. I would not expect you to run out and go do motor vehicle accidents and this and that and be on duty, you know, every weekend and everything else. Sure, in terms of the Disaster Management Act, you are required to participate in, I think it's about 60 hours of volunteer time during the year. That could be, you know, you could do 10 or 20 hours of training. Even tonight, this type of video type webinar, that could go towards an hour. If we do one of those a month and you attend and there's a discussion or panel that's taking place, just attend that for an hour a month. That already gives you 12 hours. You know, and then you could do other duties, like, for example, during school events, maybe we can get you involved to go down there and provide some radio communications or moral support or something as part and parcel of creating awareness. That's where you can contribute your time. But what happens if you don't want to contribute your time in that aspect? What do you do if you would like to contribute or be of assistance or benefit to the NGO without registering? Well, there's a very important area, and that's called donations. One or two things. Your sponsorship would be beneficial and will most definitely help volunteers, especially volunteers that might not be able to afford training, afford equipment. Look, radio equipment alone is going to set you back about 5,000 Rand. Now, as part of the radio communication, the Community Emergency Radio Network that is currently being rolled out in Constantia, Kloof in particular, it's been operational for many years for the CERT volunteers, but now moving it into the commercial side so that we can improve and increase communication capabilities, especially because of the fact that load shedding, etc., has picked up. Residents in the area need to come up on the CERN or the Community Emergency Radio Network. You're still in for 5,000 or 6,000 Rand a month, upfront fee, depending on what you take. There is a monthly cost. It's a commercial market. There's repeater high sites that need to be paid for. There's equipment, everything else. But if you would like to contribute towards disaster relief CERT financially, you can either do it as a sponsorship, in which case you can contact me, 082-859-2684, or you might want to do it as a donation. The benefit of the donation is that as Disaster Relief CERT, being an approved public benefit organization, we can, in actual fact, issue a Section 18A receipt and you can claim that receipt against your tax liability at the end of the financial year. So it can lower your taxable income quite considerably. And I think as an individual, you can contribute up to, I stand to be corrected. I need to double check the figures. It's either 10,000 or 100,000. And as a business, it's either 10 or 100. I think it's 100,000 Rand on the business and 10,000 Rand a year as an individual. So even there, your assistance will be of major benefit, not only to the organization, but I think to volunteers itself. So you can either contribute your time and come and learn and come and study and come and train, especially in terms of doing disaster area damage assessment. You can go with the more specialized levels of doing first aid training, firefighting. Animal rescue is another one. I know Kloof and Corrie and everybody else, they're very involved in things. Their lives will have to carry on during times of disaster. We will still need people that will be able to help out, even on the animal front. You get animals that come on 4 paws, and you get animals from just so high to several feet high. So everybody needs help at the end of the day. And I would like to encourage you to make contact with me, to get registered, so that we can in actual fact get the actual training going within the Constantia, Kloof and surrounds area. You never know when your time or your skill, even without receiving CERT training, you've got other skills. You might be good with children. I mean, think about it. We've now got to evacuate 1,500 kids from this school, or we might have to go into one of the other areas and go and help evacuate in those areas. That takes a special skill. I don't have time with people. I definitely don't have time with children. I'm not the ideal candidate to help out at a school, I can assure you. I've got a very, very short fuse, if I can put it to you that way. Or, I don't have much patience, because I'm very target and outcome driven, and that's where I need to go to. I need the help in my personal capacity. I need the help of other people with the skills and the skill sets in other areas, because I cannot do it on my own. Yet we are over 80 volunteers already. So please, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch the video. I hope you found it informative. The next video, I think ultimately we need to go into something a little bit more specific. I need to start moving it into, right, we've got, and here's something I need everybody to understand, that we've structured CERT in such a way that within like Constantia, Kloof on top of the ridge, we need at least 20 volunteers. Constantia, Kloof at the bottom end of the ridge, we need at least 10 volunteers just for Constantia Drive. The problem is Constantia Drive is like a multitude of complexes. We ultimately need at least 5 volunteers, registered, trained volunteers per complex in order to have an impact. Just stop and think about that for a minute. We can't take 20 volunteers in a complex to be able to, 20 volunteers to help out at the complexes when we got 10 or 20 complexes alone. So within each complex on Constantia Kloof Drive, we need at least 5, ideally 10. It depends on the number of units per complex. But a minimum of 5 people there are required. 1 to do communications and 4 others to do other things. 4 others, that's 2 people to carry a person. You're only going to carry 2 people out of a building at a time. So volunteers are needed, number 1. And of course, number 2, finances are also needed. Volunteers that come on board, please ensure you come up with the right equipment, make a plan over 2 years, 3 years, get the equipment that's required, and get yourself ready. So I hope that by the time I'm ready to do the next presentation, it will be a presentation consisting of volunteers themselves who have registered, where we in actual fact start with some specific and very direct training. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, whoever has watched, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for considering what I've actually put down on the table tonight. And please, I'll put the number on in post-production. I'll put my cell phone number up now. I'll probably have it up throughout the entire presentation. Please feel free to contact me on WhatsApp, and also ensure that you come up on the various WhatsApp groups in order to remain informed. Thank you very much, and a good evening to you all. Cheers.